Hi there, very good morning. Welcome back to ET Now. You're watching the Market Cafe with me, Kanishka Sarkar. Over the next 1 hour, we'll take you through all the global and domestic cues that you must watch out for and also tell you about the stocks that you must keep on your radar today. But first up, let's get started with an eye on the globe and see how Wall Street fared last week. In US stock futures, they're largely unchanged, very steady moves over there. This after another strong week on the Wall Street. This is investors turn their attention this week to Federal Reserve's meeting. Dow futures edged up just about 35 points, whereas futures tied to S&P 500 and Nasdaq, they inched about 0.1% higher. Now, the major averages, they're all coming off their second straight positive week. The Dow gained about 0.5%, the Nasdaq rose about 0.9%, whereas the S&P 500 that also added about 0.3%. That's leaving it at less than 1% from its all-time intraday high. So yes, positive moves over there. Now both S&P 500 and Nasdaq, they also closed out Friday with a 4-day winning streak, while Dow that advanced in 3 of the past 4 sessions. Now remember, markets did get a lift on Friday after September's delayed core PCE inflation reading came in softer than expected. So that offered some reassurance ahead of the final policy meeting this year, that is in this week. Expectations for a rate cut have climbed very sharply, with futures now pricing in roughly about 88% chance of a decrease in the rate cut. This, while the headline decision will draw attention, investors are equally focused on the Fed's updated economic projections and any signals on future leadership dynamics. So there's no major economic data due, that is today, though the New York Fed's Consumer Expectation Survey that will be released, so we'll watch out for that. On the earnings front, traders will watch for results from Costco, Broadcom, Oracle and Adobe later this week. So yes, all eyes on that. Now, that's about the Wall Street, but let's also put the spotlight on what's happening on the commodities front. Well, oil prices, they are very steady today. In fact, near the 2-week highs last week, with Brent just under $64 a barrel, whereas WTI is near that $60 a barrel mark. This while traders are trying to balance geopolitical tensions with oversupply worries. Now, remember, India's continued buying of Russian crude is also in focus, especially after Putin has promised uninterrupted fuel supplies, which is a key point ahead of the US trade talks in New Delhi, that is in India this week itself. At the same time, Ukraine's attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, including CPC Black Sea terminal, they have tightened physical crude supplies and added support to prices. However, concerns of a global glut with rising output from OPEC+, the US, Brazil and Guyana are keeping gains capped. Market direction now hinges on fresh outlooks from IEA, EIA and OPEC this week itself. Analysts are saying that oversupply may eventually dominate, but Brent for now is drifting towards $60 over the next year. So yes, that's about how oil fared. In fact, if you take a look at how gold is doing, the yellow metal also doing pretty well, very steady moves over there, holding just about 0.3% gains over there, above that 4,200 an ounce level. So yes, that's how the commodity world is faring. But time now to take a look at some of the top global stories that we are tracking this morning, and let's start with what's happening with the Fed. Now, key Fed tracked inflation gauge, the core PCE, that has eased to 2.8% in the month of September in the US. That's slightly below expectation, reinforcing bets on another rate cut this week itself. Personal income, that has risen about 0.4%, while spending edged up 0.3%. That's signaling steady but cooling demand. Moving on, now let's talk about tariffs. Now, Trump has doubled down on his defense of unilateral tariff powers, arguing that the current system under Supreme Court review is faster, more direct and essential to the US national security. He claimed that tariff speed and certainty were key to resolving global conflicts, even asserting that settled 8 wars in 10 months. That's because of executive authority. Now, Trump has insisted that if foreign governments believed these presidential powers were illegitimate, they would have challenged them loudly, framing the debate as a test of the US strength and global credibility. Moving on, let's once again talk about macros. Now, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that the economy is heading for a solid finish, predicting 3% real GDP growth and calling the holiday season very strong. Now, he has argued that consumer gloom stems more from media narratives than economic reality, noting that the growth has hit 4% in the recent quarters and could reach 3.5% in the third third quarter itself. As inflation cools to 3%, Besant has pushed back on criticism of the administration's economic stewardship, blaming lingering Biden-era pressures and insisting that the US is shifting from scarcity to prosperity despite voter frustration. Moving on, let's talk about energy now. Now, a breakthrough in the Ukraine war may be within reach, with the US voice saying that a peace deal is really close and now hinges on just two unresolved issues: the status of the Donbas and control of the Zaporizhia nuclear plant. That's calling the casualties on both sides horrific. Kellogg said that negotiations are in the last 10 meters, always the hardest stretch. His comments follow leaked US proposals and fresh talks involving Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, as Moscow signals that drift elements have already been split into 4 negotiating tracks. Moving on, let's talk about the world of entertainment. Now, Netflix has detonated the media landscape with a $72 billion deal to buy Warner Bros., Discovery's film studio, and HBO Max. It's a move that would give it control of more than half of the global streaming market. But while the agreement came together at a breakneck speed, the regulatory road ahead may be anything but. Now, the Trump administration is already viewing the merger with heavy skepticism. Senator Elizabeth Warren is demanding an antitrust probe, and the DOJ is expected to dig deep into competition risk, pricing power, and market dominance. Now, Netflix, meanwhile, expects approval to take 12 to 18 months of time. Moving on, let's shift focus to Japan, which has accused Chinese fighter jets of dangerous radar targeting against its military aircraft near Okinawa, prompting a formal protest and sharp warnings from Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Defense Minister has also vowed a calm but firm response, as Australia also voiced deep concern. Meanwhile, China has rejected Japan's claim, saying that Japan's aircraft repeatedly disrupted its carrier-based training east on Miyako Strait. Moving on now, India and the United States, they are all set for a packed diplomatic and trade week with a 3-day talk expected to begin Wednesday, as both sides push to lock in a framework trade deal by end of 2025. Deputy USTR will lead the US delegation with an aim to stabilize ties, expand strategic cooperation, and also deepen tech and space partnership. My colleague Sumita Karir is here to take us through all of the details.
That's right. After a packed week with Russian President Vladimir Putin, this week it seems is all going to be about two key visits from the United States. Well, let's talk about the first visit. It's going to be a visit by a negotiating team from the United States who are going to be in India for 3-day talks on trade, on the trade deal on which both India and the United States are working on. This team will be led by Deputy USTR Rich Switzer. This team will be meeting India's Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agarwal, and the talks are likely to begin from December 10th. However, this round is not formal. This is what sources are telling ET now. Now, this even as both the sides are hopeful of signing a framework deal by end of this year, even as focus and talks on multiple tranches is happening simultaneously. However, the focus is on a package deal that can address concerns of both the sides, including oil and reciprocal tariffs. And this trade deal is nearing completion. The second part of the PTA, well, that is going to take some time. The second visit is going to be by U.S. Secretary of State for Political Affairs, Alison Hooker. She will be visiting India from 7th till 11th December, even as the United States is making efforts to stabilize ties with India. In fact, in the past as well, we have recently signed a 10-year defense pact with the United States. We've also increased our energy imports, oil imports from the United States. This besides, of course, oil PSU signing a 1-year agreement with US to import LPG. What's going to be on the agenda of Ms. Hooker? Well, deepening economic and commercial ties, increasing US exports is going to be focused on exploration in the domains of AI and space. She will also be meeting with ISRO. She will be meeting with leaders from India's tech and space, along with the energy sectors. Now, this becomes that much more significant because just last week, President Putin was in India. Russia and India signed key MOUs in the space of energy, space, fertilizers, agriculture, payment interoperability, trading in domestic currency. And of course, there was an understanding that we need to conclude the FTA between India and Eurasian countries. However, as far as that particular visit is concerned, the Prime Minister stated in no uncertain terms that energy security, Russia is going to remain a key pillar. So, of course, the US needs to sort of balance its interest with India, keeping that in mind. Well, as far as the trade deal is concerned, the Commerce Secretary Ike stated a couple of weeks back that it's only a matter of time before this decision is taken and eventually a political call needs to be taken.
Okay, Samita, thanks for taking us through that. So yes, all eyes are going to be on the India-US trade deal that we've been talking about. And yes, the first packet is expected to go through and have talks around that this week as well. But shifting focus and talking about the world of sport and Formula One, Lando Norris soaked up the pressure for nervy Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to finish on the podium and in turn secure the F1 Drivers' Championship for the first time, ending Max Verstappen's 4-year reign. The British driver finished third in the season closer behind race winner Verstappen and the other title challenger, McLaren teammate Oscar Piastri, to claim the crown by just 2 points. Norris becomes Britain's first World Championship driver since Lewis Hamilton in 2020, with this 13th driver's crown for McLaren, coincidentally twinning with the team colours this morning. But yes, it's the first World Championship coming in for Lando Norris last evening.